This is Michelle, and you're listening to Words with Michelle, the podcast, a show where I sit down and have conversations with influencers on a range of topics, anything from natural hair, employment, discrimination, food, relationships, and everything in between. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you want to send me an email, hit me up at michelle@wordsmichelle.com. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Words with Michelle, the podcast. The title of today's show is Random Acts of Racism. The show deals with anti-Black racism. This episode is different from what I normally do. I usually have a guest come on the show and we discuss a topic. But for this episode, I decided I wanted to have a few guests share their experiences with racism. The reason why I chose to have this episode devoted to exposing racist acts is just that, to expose it. To let people know that if you're a Black person, this is what we deal with on a regular basis, and things need to change. And it's not just the violence or the N-word being hurled, it's microaggressions. For those that don't know what a microaggression is an indirect, sometimes subtle put down towards a person from a marginalized community, often disguised as a compliment. For example, someone may say, "Oh, you're pretty for a Black girl," or "You're so articulate." I got that one so many times you don't even understand. There is a perception that in Canada, we aren't as racist as the US. But I asked some of my guests how they feel about that statement. So in this show, I've included Black people with different backgrounds, work experiences, and they share their story. Please listen to my guest experiences with racism in Canada. My first guest is Joseph Daly, also known as JD Vicious. He's a musician, actor, and father. So tell me, when was the first time? I have two questions, actually, and you could choose which one. So when was your first experience of anti-Black racism? Or what is the most recent experience you've had? So you could choose whatever one you want.
The first is so long ago I can't even remember. I can't recall a time that I didn't experience anti-Black racism. I think that let me see. I can remember as far back as kindergarten, 5 years old. One of the first memories I ever remember started, but I came home one day and I said to my dad, I'm ashamed of being Black, These kids, they were, I was, I think 5, and these kids were calling me all kinds of names. They said, I told my dad, I'm ashamed of being Black. I can't stand being Black. My dad, interesting tidbit. My dad, next few days, he came home with a puzzle of a Black superhero. You know what I mean? And I said, okay, well, is he a strong guy? He said, yeah, Joey, this guy is more powerful than Superman and Batman and Green Lantern put together. And I forget the guy's name. He had a big afro, and he had a sidekick named Super Chick or something like that. This is the 70s, right? So my dad got that from Third World Books. It was a really empowering time for me to. That was the first time I remember for me to say, okay, I have this dark skin and I should be proud of it. But yeah, that's my first memory. I'm 5 years old around there.
So what actually happened? Like, were your classmates making fun of you, saying things to you, and how did you react? Like, did you say anything back to them?
Well, I gotta tell you, this happened continuously through my childhood, right? So it's almost like a mainstay. I think, okay, when Roots came out, I was 6, right?
Okay.
And so, it was all over the TV and everything. I think, and so it really magnified the kids' attention to me. You know what I mean? So kids would say, "Hey, Black guy," or okay, well, I'll put it. They call me the N-word, and all kinds of other epithets. And these are kids who were my age, 5, 6 years old.
Wow.
And, they were so clear about their racial animosities, right? So I'm talking constant. Not only the N-word. Coon, spirit chucker, jungle bunny, eggplant. These are
Well, hold up. Did you actually hear those words?
I heard all those words growing up, and these kids were 5, 6, my age. So I mean, you know, when Canadians, I mean, coming back to today, when Canadians talk about, there's no anti-black racism, I say, you gotta be joking. So what did I go through then? You know, a lot of these kids are wishing to the core. I mean, at that age, how do they know these words unless they heard it from their parents? You
Yep.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's from then. I remember racial epithets.
Have you gone through anything, like, say, recently? Do you recall anything that that has happened? Like, it doesn't have to be like this year. It could be like a couple years ago. Anything that you recall?
Well, mostly what would happen now is mostly microaggressions, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, most white people are not gonna come up to my face and call me the N-word, right?
Yeah, that's true, true, true.
You know what I'm
Actually, you
saying?
never know. People do. I've heard it, not to me, but I remember my last job.
Uh-huh.
Walking down the stairs to go to the subway, and I heard this guy just yell it to this girl.
Really?
Yeah, and it was so shocking to me because it's like I never heard anyone say it. This was like 2-3 years ago, and I never heard anyone yell it. It really freaked me out. I mean, not being naive or whatever, living in a bubble, because I live in Toronto, but for some reason you don't hear it, right? But this guy just yelled it, and I'm like, well, it kind of slapped me in the face, right? It wasn't towards me, but a black woman.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, for the most part, I'm a big dude too. So most white people are not gonna come up to me and say,
That's
"Hey,
true.
N-word." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
They're afraid of the repercussions, and rightfully so.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But microaggressions, a lot.
Like what? Tell me one.
This is funny. One time I went to a friend's house, or I knocked on the door, and the person who opened the door was I went to the wrong house.
Mm.
Who opened the door was a Chinese lady, and I thought she was going to die when she saw me. She almost put up her hands. Don't shoot. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of thing. Like, just little small.
Okay.
Microaggressions, like listen, this is so numerous that it's hard to really pinpoint how many times I've heard it. The thing is, I think white people, their ancestors did them an injustice to really make them feel like they're superior in any kind of way. You know what I mean? Because I think microaggressions comes out without sometimes people even knowing it.
Yeah.
I
think it's just something that's kind of automatic, not automatic, but just so embedded in their subconscious, or that it's just like they don't know, right? They don't realize what they've said could be offensive.
Or sometimes they know, here's a microaggression, okay? This is not recently, when I was, I don't know, I think around 12, 13.
Yeah.
I used to go to private school, and one of my best friends is a white guy. He's actually well known these days. He's on TV, and I don't want to say his name, but
okay, no problem.
He's actually a guy on TV. One day we're going to gym, and that was the first time I saw my friend without a shirt on, and he had freckles, right?
Yeah.
And I innocently said, "Hey man, you got freckles, whatever, right? Back innocently, right?" And I guess he took it as an insult.
Oh.
And then he said, "Yeah, but you're black."
Wow! Oh my God! Oh no!
And this is the first time that he was a good friend of mine, really good friend of mine. He never really, intimated that he had any kind of racial thoughts in his head at all. And he thought saying, "Yeah, but you're black," was an insult.
Yeah.
And this is my friend. Like, it goes really deep seated. Yeah.
What was your reaction to that? Because did you just let it go, or what?
Well, my reaction back then was, I was upset. Like, "Hey man, how can you say something like that? What do you mean? Because I'm black?" Nowadays, I'd be like, "What are you supposed to? What do you mean by that? Well, what? Like, take me through this. What do you try?" I would say that now.
Yeah.
I did, but I was 12.
Yeah.
Like, I just got offended. But looking back, I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of messed up."
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
My next guest is Lorraine, who is a lawyer. She has lived in many countries around the world, and she currently lives in Ottawa. Please hear her story.
The person came up to me. I was with a group of my colleagues, all of whom were white. I was the only Black legal advisor in the room. And we were chatting, meeting with this person, and the person said to me, "Oh, do you have a legal background?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Yes, I'm a legal advisor," and I gave him what my position was because I thought maybe he didn't realize who I was. And then he said, "Oh, so does that mean you went to law school?" And I'm like, I'm in a room of lawyers, and I'm the only person that you are questioning whether or not I'm a lawyer. And if for some strange reason, being a lawyer in my case would not require me to go to law school. So, and nobody else in the room was questioned in this way. And so that's a typical of that. It's like being representative. And usually I'm in a lot of spaces, I am the only Black person, the only Black woman. And so a lot of times you have questions about you being in that space and you representing in that space. And that's really kind of indicative of the kind of experiences that I've had. Or for example, again, I was in a negotiation representing, and I was asked, I made my intervention and I introduced myself as representing Canada. And then the person said, "Well, thank you for the representative from Cote d'Ivoire."
Wow.
And there was no country in Cote d'Ivoire, but in their head, a Black person, and it begins with a C, with a sound. She must have said Cote d'Ivoire. It could obviously not have been Canada. So it's like little things like that where people have certain expectations about who you are based on how you live, and then it impacts how you live in the space. Because, so for example, I was just telling a friend of mine the other day, whenever I do international travel, I do not dress for comfort. And my white friend can put on her hoodie and her yoga stretch pants and her sneakers and travel in economy or even in business or first class. If I'm traveling in business class, there is no way I'm dressing comfortably, because you're going to be questioned as to whether or not you believe in the space. When you go to the lounge, you're going to be looked at a certain way. You realize you're representing a race, and so I got to make sure I look a certain way. You don't have that freedom, and that's really what I find exhausting about racism and the daily acts of racism, is because you always have to think about it. It's not, you can't just be. And so that's been really my experiences of racism.
What's your response to people who say that there's no racism in Canada?
I say it's about on the receiving end, because you can't live in a society that's unequal and say that there's no racism. And then I also ask the question, what do you mean by racism? Because some people think unless people are lynching or calling people the N-word or saying go back where you came from, which does exist in Canada, then it's not racism. But it's like those daily kind of diminishing your experiences, always having to justify who you are and how you live and why your voice is important, always having to be very nervous around police or any people of authority, not because you've done something wrong, but because you know the perception of Black people, knowing that when you drive your car, because you drive a nicer car, you have to be uber vigilant and careful. So those are the kinds of things that you deal with in Canada. And it's more like access to certain things and people not recognizing the benefits and the privileges that they have and saying how society is equal. To me, that is one of the most difficult and challenging and annoying parts of racism, is because people have this perception that there's an equality, and therefore if you're not reaching a certain stage in your life or your career, it's because of something that's inherently wrong with you rather than something that's inherently wrong with the society. So for me, it's unrealistic to live in Canadian society and say that there's no racism. When you look at the structures of power, when you look at who's making decisions, when you look at who's on the receiving end of those decisions, who has agency, it's clear that there's a structure that benefits certain people. I think maximally, I would say white males, and then going down from there, prejudice other people.
The next person that I speak with is Maris, who currently lives in Saudi Arabia, but he did live in Toronto and Montreal. He will speak about some of the random acts of racism that he experienced while he lived in Canada.
So my name is Maris, and I'm a content producer. So I basically write stories for a living for different brands and companies. Um, so I've worked in travel and kids media and science and technology. So it's kind of different fields. Um, I've had some interesting experiences, basically like having apply for jobs, and because my name sounds German, that's my last name, Wesh.
Okay.
So sometimes when people see this name, well, they're saying, "Oh, he's probably German," or whatever. And then I've had an employment agency in Montreal. Like I submitted my CV, and the woman on the phone was really enthusiastic, and then. And I said, when can you come in? And I said, okay, I can come this afternoon. So the same day I came in, and right away, like her demeanor changed completely. She's like, she was aggressive. She was because she had to give me the interview. She tried to set up trick questions, and you could tell like the whole vibe was off, like completely different from me from the phone.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the whole issue of power. So the people who are the gatekeepers, sometimes they're the ones who kind of like make sure that the gates keep being closed for certain people. And
What's your response to people who say there's no racism in Canada? What's your response to that?
of course there clearly is racism. I mean, we grew up with the concept of the two founding nations, and I think there's this belief that if you're not part of the dominant white culture, then you're not you have to adapt to it, or if you don't, then you don't have a place in this country. Even though we talk about being a mosaic and being multicultural, I think there has been progress, but at the same time, I mean, look at people tend to be very polite in Canada, but if you are in environments where if you're flying the wall, I mean, you can hear a lot of things. I was in the military in Canada when I was 18 and between 17 and 19. I was in the military, and the military is sort of a place where this whole societal political correctness or whatever doesn't exist. It's like it's not a civilian world. Like everybody's just like who they are, and people just are very clear and honest about their views. And because it's the military and like nobody cares, and it's like it might have changed since then, but that was like the most racist 3 years.
Wow.
And these people, like you see them later on, like I see them years later on Facebook, and they're like very like normal people and just like having great jobs and asking you to be friends on Facebook, but then they kind of.
I'm like, no,
like, you
I'm sorry.
I realize what.
That's funny.
It's like because in the military, it's like it really comes out where this is the national like identity. This is who we are as the founding British nation, and you could clearly tell like there's this cultural thing where if you need to be an officer, then there was clearly. I actually had one person tell me that it's like, well, I remember this conversation. I was like, what does it take to become an officer in the Canadian military? And the guy said, well, first you have to be white. He actually said that, and it's like everybody, like if people were listening to that, they're like, nobody said anything. It was like, all right. Obviously, there are black officers and Asian officers in the military. But I know that they've gone through a lot to get there. But there's definitely a lot of like like racial kind of macro aggressions, not only macro aggressions of the military. So after having experienced that in the military sense, like when you go into the corporate world, it's like nothing compared to
I see. Yeah,
because like you have
practice, not
you have the
practice.
societies like you have to respect societal norms and like being like more less obvious about it, but there is definitely an undertone of that in Canada, but we're just like less open about it. But hopefully things with the help of people who are, like I said, not necessarily building the table but building the bridges for other people to follow afterwards. Things can happen.
The next guest was featured on my blog. Her name is Grace Cameron. She is the publisher of Jamaican Eats magazine. Just to give you some context, she was born in Jamaica but lived in Toronto and Vancouver, and now she currently resides in Toronto. She speaks about an incident that happened at her home in Toronto.
Living where I live here, I've had someone knocked at the door. I opened it, and the guy, without missing a heartbeat, said to me, "Oh, you must be the maid."
Wow. When did that happen? Is that a recent thing or before?
That happened about 2.5 years ago.
It's still recent. That's ridiculous. Who has the audacity to say that? Like,
I had a policeman who came, this was last year, I think, knocked on the door again. I opened it, and his first question is, "Oh, do you live here?" So I said, "Yes." There's no reason I opened the door from it,
exactly.
And then I said yes, and immediately he said, "Oh, this must be a rooming house."
I can't, oh God, that stuff angers me so much, like it really, really does, because it's like, we're not on a level playing field. We already know that, right?
Yeah.
But you're always hit with that. You're always hit with that. Like, I can't believe it.
But even coming back from Jamaica, I have to say, because in Jamaica, not only, before I started the magazine in 2006, like I said, I was a lifestyle editor at the Gleaner, but I also taught at 2 universities at the same time. I actually taught at the University of the West Indies in Kingston, news writing.
Wow.
And at the same time, I taught, now that was very much part-time, so maybe 2 sessions a week, whatever it was. But I also taught at Northern Caribbean University, which was outside of Kingston, in Mandeville, maybe an hour and a half or so drive away. And I taught news and feature writing. And I started the magazine there, did a lot. I'm telling you this to say, when I came back from Jamaica, moved to Vancouver, and was applying for jobs, I still intended to keep the magazine going. But, my intention was to find work, part-time, full-time, while I figure out doing the magazine and everything here. I remember I could never find a job again. And in terms of long-term, I got contracts and so on. But I remember being told at least twice, and one time in particular really sticks in my mind, where the woman looked at my resume and she kind of leaned back and she kind of chuckled and says, "Wow, this almost seems too good to be true."
Wow.
She didn't say to me, "Where are your references?" She didn't say, "Provide your references," or "I have my portfolio of work."
Yeah.
So it's not like I didn't have stuff to show. But yeah, it was twice, like, "Oh, this almost seems too good to be true." They're questioning it. And then I had people who were more well-meaning who says, "Well, what if you take off that you worked in Jamaica, that you just," so I said, "But this is where I gained a lot of experience. This is where I did a lot. This is where I've proven my chops. This is where I can speak to that because of my efforts. I won a couple of international awards for the food section. This is where I can say I boosted subscription. You can check all of those things. Why would I want to change it?" And somebody makes a point, which I agree. If I were, especially a white man, but if I were white, and if my experience was, let's say, in some small, tiny town, Britain or the US, people would not be looking at you and saying, wow, this seems almost too good to be true.
Yeah.
They would just believe it, and chances are you would have been offered so many different jobs. I am extremely proud of where I'm from and what I've done. I worked hard for that, you know. And again, these are things that are provable in terms of my look at my work, look at the actual work. In terms of references, I had my references lined up not just in Jamaica but here. You know, those are the things in my mind or my opinion that you get people, or you get some sense beyond what they tell you of what they've done, you know. So if I have my references, if I have my portfolio, I even created an online portfolio again with a lot of pieces that I did here. Just look at those. I mean, if you're looking for someone to write or someone to do whatever, here's the evidence.
Yeah.
Wow.
The last guest on this episode is Jacob. He lives in Ottawa, and he speaks about the numerous experiences that he's encountered. Please listen.
First of all, my name is Jacob Melcher, and I work in photography, videography, and also in cinema. So that's what I do. I am from Montreal, grew up a little bit all over the world because of my parents' job, and now I'm in Ottawa. There is something that happened years and years ago. I was walking home one day, and it was late at night, and I was walking home, and the police stopped me, and they were like, asking me, where you going? I'm like, I'm going home. And they were like, okay, we're going to follow you home. And then when I got home, you know, it was a pretty, it was a pretty high class neighborhood. So when they followed me home, you know, I was like almost inside. I said hello. I said bye. Thank you very much. And then they were like, no, go in. I was like, okay. You know, in my head, I was like, wow, that's pretty nice. They want to make sure that and they waited until I got inside of the house and I opened the door, and then I waved again saying thank you. But after that, years later, that's when I thought to myself, they were not making sure that I got home safe. They wanted to know if I really lived there.
Exactly. And that's why they're like, go in. They wanted to be at a key to allow yourself to get in, to enter, right?
Exactly, because before that, they told me that they heard there were burglars in the area and things like that, so they wanted to make sure that everything was okay. I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. You know, I'm just going home. Came from work, going home, and they really waited. Because, you know, when I got into the entry, I just wave and say thank you. But they were like, no, go in. And
so where was this? I'm not sure if you said it. Where did this happen? In Montreal? And
that was in Montreal.
Okay.
That was in Montreal. Okay. So, you know, it was an area where there was not a lot of black people. So actually we were the first black people there. And yeah, it's like years later, that's when I look back and I was like, oh, that's what it was. It's, you know, racism in Canada is so subtle, it's so different that to us, it's like we need to ask the question, is this racism? Because it's so subtle sometimes. I find that, you know, the States or even in different countries, it's really in your face and you know what you're dealing with right away.
Yeah.
But in Canada, it could be like, you know, I'm taking lunch at work and somebody comes and says, "Oh, your food smells very good," and at the end of the day, you get an email, sent to everyone to say, make sure that when you bring food, that it doesn't smell too strong and things like that. That happened to me many. And that's the thing. It's like it's really two-faced. The person will come to you and say, "Oh, it smells very good. What you eating?" And but after that, they go and complain to the direction, to the how do you call that, the
The director
management.
or manager, yeah.
Yeah. But in my case, I was eating Haitian food, and the person came to me. We never received an email before about food, but it's when the person came to me. I don't know if it's the person that complained. I don't know if it was somebody else, but it's when I was with my food. That's when people were like, "Oh, it smells," and things like that. So, what I want to convey is that the racism in Canada is so different. And it's like sometimes it's so subtle that we don't feel it as much. We wait until somebody dies, we wait until there's police brutality. But you know what? It's inside people's mind. And it's the little thing they do. I always say this: the way you do the little things is the way you'll do the big. I have another experience. Um, Again, I was in Montreal. I used to have a very, I wouldn't say a luxurious car. I used to have a BMW, and literally every month, sometimes 3 times a month, I would get pulled over. I would get to work late because I would get pulled over that often. And until I met, a good friend of mine, he's my lawyer, and a white guy, I was like, "Hey, Eric, don't you think it's crazy that, we get pulled over?" He has exactly the same car as me, same color, everything,
Hmm.
window and everything. I was like, "Isn't it funny that, we get pulled over because we have that type of car?" And then he was like, "No, I never got pulled over."
Wow.
Every month,
And
sometimes 3, 4 times a month, I had to sell that car.
oh, you sold it.
I sold it, and I took another car that was less, just not to have a problem in the city.
What?
Because
So, what did you say anything to the lawyer so he at least knew what was happening? Because it was clear that you were racially profiled or it was a racist for you to be stopped. Did the lawyer see that? Did he understand it?
he understood, because we had that conversation. I was like, "I can't believe that this is now happening to me." And his response was, he was sympathetic, but he was like, "Man, I can't believe that you get pulled over just because you have that type of car."
Tell me why you sold your car.
So that's the thing. At that time, I was fresh out of university as a pharmacist. Uh, I had my license. It was my first job. I was making good money. But every time that the police stopped me, I was late for work. So, and as a pharmacist, you have a lot of responsibility. You can't be late.
Mm.
So it was affecting my livelihood. So I had to sell the car. Do you understand how much power those people had over my life? I had to sell my car in order to pay my rent, in order to be able to do my job that I studied 7 years for. It's not like I was a bum out of the street and I got a BMW just to shine. I worked for that car.
And then you were actually punished because of that car, because the police would stop you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
a shame.
and that's when I realized that, what? I'm not going to allow people to have decision over my life. So that minute, I said to myself, you know what? I need to, even though I studied 7 years, but I need to create my own company. I need to have a plan B. And because at that time I didn't have kids. I was young, but they pushed me to make that decision and say, no, I need to be self-employed because somebody just can dictate and say, no, you're no longer working here. Oh no, you're not gonna go. You're not gonna get to your job on time just because I don't want you to, because I don't like the way you look. How arrogant! And it was something that was happening 2, 3 times a month.
So,
And
but
I'm not. And the thing is, I'm not even gonna talk about the aspect of when I would get to work. You will get the eye rolling and say, "Oh yeah, you were stopped again." Yeah, sure.
oh, so you're saying people didn't believe you when you told them? Wow.
Because that's not their reality.
How long were you at that job for?
I lasted a year, and after that, I was like, I just jumped to other things.
Okay. Did you ever? So you okay? You mentioned that you did tell your boss and stuff that you were stopped, but did your boss
No,
believe you?
I told my boss. Um, he believed. I want to say he believed me, but I don't know. But one thing for sure is that I was not let go because I was a very good employee. Because the thing is, everywhere I go, I know because of the color of my skin, I'm at a disadvantage. So I need to shine. I need to be more than the best.
Wow, this episode has really affected me. It's sad to hear that all my guests have been demeaned, undervalued, insulted in such underhanded ways. But just listening to my guests, I can identify with most of the things they've been through. You know, I've been called names. You also you're always questioned about your education, your experience. I've dealt with that in my career, in all my 9 to 5s, even up to what Jacob said in the end. That you have to be better. You just can't do an average job. You have to be better because you are judged, right? So I do thank all my guests. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences with me. I really do appreciate it. What I want from this episode is to bring to light that we need to stop making these racist acts normal, and we do not need to accept it. In an upcoming show, I will discuss how we can make that change. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Just a reminder, you can subscribe to The Words of Michelle, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. You can also listen to the shows on my blog at wordsofmichelle.com. If you have any questions or would like to provide a comment or feedback, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at michelle@wordsofmichelle.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, bye.